Hello, welcome back. I'm Andy, philosophy lecturer, and here we talk about ancient Greek philosophy. And we are now talking about the Presocratics. Today we talk about Thales, who is the first scientist and the first philosopher, one of the wise men of ancient Greece, and is generally considered the point at which proper philosophy, proper science begins. He lived from roughly 625 to 545 BC, and we know of one point where he was certainly alive and active, which is 585 BC, because he predicted a solar eclipse. And we can date this eclipse precisely, and so we know when Thales lived. There are many funny stories about Thales in Diogenes Laertius, and if you want to know who Diogenes Laertius is, you have to go back to the previous video. He was one of the seven wise men of ancient Greece, and anything he wrote was probably already lost by the time of Aristotle. But he was himself widely traveled. He went to Babylon, he went to Egypt, he learned Babylonian mathematics, geometry. In Egypt, he measured the height of the pyramids, and he is said to have predicted the solar eclipse with knowledge he got from the Babylonians. So he was somebody who synthesized the knowledge of his time. He collected it and then he synthesized it and he tried to make something of it. There are also other funny stories. One time, somebody who doubted that Thales was actually so clever said, okay, Thales, if you are so intelligent, why are you still poor? Why don't you have more money? I thought philosophers, being so intelligent would be able to easily to make more money. And Thales was a little taken aback by this, and he thought, how can I do this? How can I show them that a philosopher can achieve anything he wants because he is so intelligent? And he already had studied the skies, he was an expert in astronomy, and so he observed the weather and he found, in some way that's not explained in the story, that the following year would be a good year for olives. Olives would be produced in great amounts. And so he went in the winter when nobody was thinking about olives and rented all the olive presses for the next year. He paid off the owners of the olive presses to rent them all to him. And next year, when the olive harvest was indeed so great as he had predicted, everybody came and they wanted to press their olives, but they could not because Thales owned all the olive presses, and so he could put up the prices, he could ask for whatever he wanted because people needed the oil from their olives, and he got rich in this way and proved that a philosopher can get rich if he wants to. So if we are not rich, it's not because we cannot, it's because we don't care. And so there are many other stories, funny stories like this. He once was so occupied by looking at the stars that he fell into a well in the night, right, in a garden that he didn't know well. And an old woman who was guiding him started laughing at him. You say that you know everything about the word Thales, but you cannot look at what is in front of your feet. So Thales famously thought that the first element, the most basic element, is water, and he started this tradition of trying to find what the basic element is, what keeps the world together. And now we cannot only guess today why he thought this. He wanted obviously to have one explanation for the world. We talked last time about economical explanations. He wanted to have one explanation that explains, many phenomena, why the world is like this. And water somehow seems to be an element that is very flexible in the way it appears, right? Water can be liquid, but then it can also evaporate and become gas, and it can freeze and become like a stone when it is like ice, right? And so water has this flexibility of being different things. And this is one reason, perhaps, why Thales thought that water had the potential to be the basic element for everything else. Another thing, of course, is the observation that all living things require water. You cannot germinate a spore or a seed without water, so you need to water your plants. Obviously, water is very important. It creates life. You water the plants and they grow, right? If you don't know about photosynthesis, which they didn't, then the only observation you can make is that plants grow out of water. This is what you give them, and this is what they grow from. And Humans need to drink a lot of water. If you don't drink water, you die within 3-4 days, while you can go for a whole month without eating food. So water is immensely important for life. The weather is mostly water, right? It's raining, it's snowing, it's humid, it's mist. So water is really everywhere. It's necessary for life. And it is, as Aristotle says, the natural principle of moist things. And so it seemed a good candidate for this kind of thing, for one substance that can be at the basis of everything. Thales went further. He thought of the earth like a floating island on top of water. So if water is so important and it's in all things, then perhaps it's also the element on which the earth floats, because the earth itself must have been created through water. And so he thought the earth is really like an island that floats on the sea. From Thales, we know very little. From his actual philosophy, his actual writings, we don't have any writings. We only know what others wrote about him. So it's difficult to pin down a precise argument why he thought that water is at the base of all things. But again, the most important thing about him is not the answer, it's not the water. The most important thing about Thales is the question. What is there that can explain this variety of phenomena we see in an economical way, by assuming that there is some unifying principle in the world? And so it attempted to provide this materialistic, right, element, not based on gods or based on imagination or forces that we cannot see. It's a materialistic explanation. It's a thing we can see. It's a thing we can measure, water. And unifying, because it's the basis of everything. And this creates a kind of science, a scientific approach to the world. Of course, this was the beginning only of science, and Thales was still very much a man of his time. He was influenced by religion, he was influenced by myths. He was not a modern man, right? And so he also thought that the universe is full of gods. Now, he thought that the soul is mixed with the whole universe, and everything is full of souls, and everything is full of gods. And this seems a little crazy until we perhaps rephrase it. You could perhaps say that Thales did not really mean it literally. This is a way of speaking. And since we don't have his own words, it's the way others interpreted him. Maybe he never said this thing in this way. What he did was to observe magnets. And magnets have this unique property of causing movement. If you have a magnet and you hold it close to another magnet, the other magnet will move, right, after the first one. And they will move together. And so a magnet can cause movement. And if you think about it, nothing else moves on its own without a good reason. Nothing else can pull something else to move, for example, also. Things move, when they fall down a slope, like rivers flow down. But magnets move even up a slope. And this is something that normally only animals and humans do, only living things that can move, not even, plants. And so for Thales, the magnet showed that a thing like a stone, which is a magnet, looks like a stone, but it has a force inside it that can make things move just as if they were alive. And so perhaps this is where he said there might have been a soul in there, a kind of life force. So perhaps we should just rephrase it. Instead of saying soul or God, we could say life force. There is a life force in the magnet that makes the other magnet move. And so magnets do something that non-animals or non-alive beings, dead beings, stones, don't normally do. And so perhaps there are souls in everything. And this might have been somehow the motivation for this, that there is an underlying force, these underlying souls or forces that move everything. And this problem of where motion comes from is actually a very common problem, a very common philosophical question, not only with the Eleatics later, but also with God. Often a proof for God in religious philosophy is that God is the first mover. It's the one who put the universe into motion by giving it movement, while the universe without God would be an unmoving static place of things that are just there, but they don't move, right? And even in modern cosmology, the first event is the Big Bang, which sets the universe into motion. So this question, where does motion come from and what is the first mover, and how do things move, why do they move, and who pushed them to start them moving, is a question that goes deep into religious philosophy also, and also today in cosmology and physics. And so what is the first pusher? How does this first movement get initiated? And this is related to the question, what is the first cause of all effects, right? You have something, you see something, it rains. Okay, what's the cause for the rain? It's the cloud. What's the cause for the cloud? It's the evaporation. What's the cause of the evaporation? Is the sunlight. And what's the cause for the sunlight? Is that the sun exists, and who made the sun, And so if you follow these chains of explanation or of cause and effect, by always asking for the next cause, at some point you will end up with a first cause. So who made the sun? Why is it there? And then you need either a Big Bang theory, or you need God, a creation theory. You need some way to explain the first movement. And so Thales does this. He provides us with an account of movement by saying that there are these souls in all things. Again, it's not the best explanation, it's not very scientific, but what counts here is the question. He asks the question about the movement, about what causes movement and what kinds of things can move. And even if his answer is not good, his question is very important, because for the rest of time, our time, philosophy in the past 2,500 years has been asking this question: what is the first mover? What is the first cause? Thales predicted the solar eclipse in 585 BC. We talked about this already. This was, we can put it very precisely, the 28th of May in 585. There were two armies fighting back then, and Thales predicted that the eclipse would come, and then when it came, these armies were terrified and thought that the gods are against their fighting, and so they stopped fighting actually and made peace. The Babylonians did not really have the mathematics to predict precisely when an eclipse would take place. They had some mathematical framework to predict eclipses, but they predicted too many, because solar eclipses are only visible in a small geographic area, and the Babylonians could say there will be an eclipse, but they couldn't say where it would be. And so today in research, often there is this opinion that Thales was just lucky in that he used Babylonian mathematics, he predicted the eclipse correctly, but then it also happened to be where he was and where these armies were fighting, which was a stroke of luck, right? It could have happened that he had predicted an eclipse that was not visible at his place. Another thing Thales did was to measure the height of the Great Pyramid in Giza, in Cairo. So he went to Egypt, he talked to the priests, he saw the pyramids, and he wanted to measure the height. And it's funny to, stop for a moment and try to think, how would you measure the height of a pyramid? It's very difficult, because the pyramid is, a pyramid shape. You cannot easily measure down because there's stone under your feet if you stand at the top. It's even difficult to get at the top. And then from up there, how do you measure the precise height? You can only measure the side of it, but not the height of it. Again, it shows the ingenuity of Thales that he found a very simple way to do it. He just stood in the desert beside the pyramid, and he waited until his shadow in the sun was exactly as long as his height, which means that the sun was at a 45-degree angle. And then he measured the length of the shadow of the pyramid, which was much easier, because now he could just make a little sign in the sand somewhere where the shadow ended, and then he had as much time as he wanted to pace, to in some way measure the length of the shadow. And then he knew the height of the pyramid. And in this way, he measured very easily, without any exertion, without having to scale the thing, the size of the pyramid. So this just shows, it's not a great achievement, but it shows how clever he was and how practical he was in finding solutions. Okay, and so this is Thales, the first philosopher, the first scientist who introduced this idea of scientific method, right? Not fully fledged scientific method in today's sense, but trying to find reasonable, rational explanations for things and asking these difficult questions about the world. And we will see in the coming videos how other philosophers after him, pre-Socratics, dealt with the same types of questions. So, come back for the next episode, for the next lecture on Anaximander and Anaximenes. See you there. Bye-bye.